Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is the journalist Kim Cross. Ms. Cross had a bestseller with her detailed account of the deadly 2011 tornado in Tuscaloosa. She has recently published her true crime study of the Polly Klaas abduction, In Light of All Darkness, which has been nominated for an Edgar. I spoke with Kim Cross in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Well, Kim, it's nice to see you again.
It is so good to see you.
First, before I forget, let me offer you my congratulations. Tomorrow in Monroeville, you're going to receive the Alabama Capote Prize for distinguished work in nonfiction for In Light of All Darkness, which bears a lot of, as we will elaborate, it bears a lot of resemblance to In Cold Blood, the Capote masterpiece, in the sense of it's true crime, it's detailed, it's emotional. But before we go there, there are other places to go. I know you as a graduate student here at the university, but you had a life before that. Are you an Alabamian? Are you a Californian? What is your story?
Where am I from?
Yes.
The short answer that I give now is Califlora-Bama-Ho. I lived in Alabama 3 times. California, Alabama, California, Fort Walton Beach, Florida, Alabama undergrad, California started my career, Alabama grad school, and then now I live in Idaho.
Yeah, there was a little space between your bachelor's degree and your master's degree.
That's right.
You had gone back to California, worked for a bit.
Yep. I was a business writer in San Francisco during the dot-com boom and bust.
And then came here for the MA.
That's right, where we shared an office.
Well, yes, that was 1937 or something like that. After finishing the MA here, you went to work in Birmingham, and you had a couple of different jobs, but the one that I know about is that you were an editor for Southern Living.
That's right. I was a travel writer and editor.
Yeah.
And then I ran cookinglight.com, and then I came back as more of an assigning editor for Southern Living.
But your job at Southern Living that attracted everybody's awe was that you were the editor of Rick Bragg.
Yeah, I did.
Tell me about that.
So I had met Rick before, and in some conversation, we decided that we ought to give him the Southern Journal column. And that's how he came to write that column, and I became his editor. And he actually did, he was wonderful about editing. I did actually edit him a little bit, but he also became a mentor. And when I wrote the piece that later became What Stands in a Storm, the book, he and I collaborated on that, and he offered to write my foreword for my book.
His was the inside of the back page.
That's right.
Yes. Well, I heard when that started up that he was given it every month.
Yes.
I started hearing from people that they had subscribed to the magazine in order to get Rick Bragg's essay on the inside of the back cover. I mean, that's hot stuff.
It is the first page a lot of people read. They start from the back.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And during that time, the tornado here in Tuscaloosa was 2011?
Mm-hmm. April 27th, 2011.
And you set about writing the story of what happened, in a sense, on that day.
That's right.
Maybe a day before, maybe a day after, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
And that became What Stands in a Storm.
Yes.
Let's talk about that book for a while. The most, I mean, there are books about catastrophes.
Right.
But there have because of technology, there's never been a book quite like that before. You used the most modern available sources for that book. Tell me about this. The phones, texts, emails, what?
That's right. One of the challenges of reporting on a disaster is that time seems to disappear. People's memory of time gets very muddy and stretched. And so I layered time-stamped sources on top of other time-stamped sources. So it's a very accurate minute-by-minute unfolding of the storm through the people who were in it.
Were they texts, as we understand, they were phone texts?
Yes. So I think probably
I forget which year people started doing what exactly.
So I actually started with James Spann's wall-to-wall coverage, and
Yes.
I transcribed every minute of his wall-to-wall coverage that day, and then that was time-stamped. And on top of that, I found sources that were also time-stamped, such as text conversations between Danielle Downs and her sister, and they were talking as the storm was brewing, as tornadoes were headed toward both of them, one in Tuscaloosa, one in Mississippi. And because the texts are time-stamped, I knew exactly what time they said something. And when Danielle said, "Oh my gosh, I'm looking at this huge tornado coming straight towards Tuscaloosa," I knew that in her conversation, she said she was watching James Spann, so I could see exactly what was on the screen at that moment.
I'm not positive this is the right word, but the new book on the Polly Klaas kidnapping and that book share what I would think of as a kind of intimacy. That is, the people you are reporting on in What Stands in a Storm, some of them were injured, some of them died. It's very personal.
Yes.
And I know that you're very ethically keen on this kind of thing. You must have spent a good deal of time, not getting permission, it's not exactly that, but making an understanding with people about what you were using and not using?
Yes.
And that will apply, obviously, with the next book as well.
Exactly. I really believe in giving my characters agency in their story, and it's something that in the era of journalism when I was raised, it was kind of a no-no, and in some cases a fireable offense to let them participate in. For example, I would read them the story before running it in publication, so that they could weigh in and one, know what was going in, and two, say like, I'm really uncomfortable with this part. I never let them rewrite it, but I always gave them agency to weigh in and let me know what their concerns were. But really, it's a relationship that starts from the first meeting when I ask them, if they want to participate in the book and to what level they would like agency. And some of them don't want to be interviewed and only want to be able to fact check or express their concerns. Some opt out, and others say we're all in, and then we go on a journey together that takes us to really deep emotional places.
And this pattern that you established, this pattern of how you go about your work, which you established in What Stands in a Storm, in a sense was preparation for all the painful interviews that you had to conduct for the Polly Klaas story. Now, kidnapping has been going on. I'm sure cavemen kidnapped people. It's been going on forever. But this particular abduction of this girl caught the national imagination. The idea, I mean, it's bold to say so, the search for America's child is, I remember it, of course, but it's sort of true. Everybody across the country was concerned about what happened and what happened to her and are they going to find her? Are they going to catch the killer? The roots of this may be in the town. It's an idyllic little place, the town. Talk about that little California town.
So Petaluma, California in 1993 was this all-American town. It was a small town north of San Francisco by about an hour and change. And it was the kind of place where you moved to raise kids with unlocked doors and let them, run free and walk around the corner to the market. And so it was the kind of place where there wasn't a lot of crime. It maybe averaged one murder or less a year. So this sort of thing didn't happen there. And it was a tight-knit community, and it really shocked them and made them come together in the wake of this?
It cries out for a kind of mythical interpretation. That it's an Edenic spot,
Right.
where evil intrudes.
Exactly. I think Reagan used it in his campaign to represent the all-American small town.
Is that right?
He did.
Well, yeah, it's sensible. Kidnappings, I mean, they are odd. I mean, if over time you see on television a child goes missing in a train station, a child goes missing in a department store, a child goes missing at the park. This child went missing how?
So Polly Klaas was having a slumber party with two friends in her bedroom, and her mother was asleep next door with her little sister. And a total stranger walked into her house with a knife, told them to get down on the floor, said, "I'm not going to hurt you," but he put pillowcases over their heads to blind them and gagged them, and then took Polly away.
She was in her own bedroom, in her own home.
Right. She was a very low-risk victim as well. She didn't go out much. She didn't
Right.
loiter, and this really shocked the conscience of the nation and violated the sanctity of the home.
Yes, I mean it's perfect. It's an Edenic town, and she's in her own safe bedroom,
Right.
and so we may get to this. We'll get to this. The conclusion here is nowhere is safe,
Right.
but we'll hold off on that for a moment.
Yeah.
The response of the town is, of course, horror, but surprisingly, also an immense amount of volunteerism and cooperation. That was a big segment of your book, how people wanted to help.
Exactly. I think Petaluma was so shocked and said, "Not in our town. We're not going to let this happen." And they came out in droves to help. I think around 4,000 people, volunteers, helped, and they came out and beat the bushes. They did search parties, worked with the police to figure out where to search. They created flyers that they posted with staplers on telephone poles and taped to windows. Most storefronts had not just one poster, but 2 or 3, and they wallpapered the town with posters, and then they started driving them to the truck stop to give them to truckers to say, "Okay, you're going to Oregon, take these and put those up in Oregon."
And that was not, I mean, this can't be the very, very first time ever in the history of the world, but it's notable.
It is.
What did the police think about citizen volunteering at that time?
At that time, they were grateful because the volunteer participation meant that more people would see the flyer, and that generated leads. When a kidnapping happens, they have a paucity of evidence compared to a murder where there's a body and a murder weapon and there's physical evidence. In a kidnapping, there is an absence and often only trace evidence. So they had some trace evidence, but without a suspect, it's not really that useful. And so they were counting on public leads for someone to spot him.
So they were happy to have the cooperation.
In general, yes.
Yeah, in the past, I don't know why I think this, but I have it in my head that they would have thought of a lot of citizen involvement as interference or muddying the water kind of thing.
It can complicate things for sure, but they were relying on the chance that someone would see a flyer and someone would see the kidnapper very quickly.
Police procedures at the time of the kidnapping, and you go into this a little bit. They didn't know, they didn't have any real clues, they didn't have any real suspects. So they bore down on Polly's friends and Polly's family.
Right. So most child abductions involve a family member and a custody battle or someone who knows the child. And so they had to clear and polygraph everyone in Polly's family and immediate friends. But with Kate and Jillian, who were her 12-year-old friends who were in the room, they were the eyewitnesses. They interviewed them almost immediately after the kidnapping that night. And they interviewed them separately, as they should. And those interviews, there were 2 minor inconsistencies, and that caused them to worry that the girls were either lying or maybe covering for Polly. Maybe she had run off with a boyfriend, and they really subjected these 2 girls to increasingly intense interviews because they were desperate for any information, and they thought it was possible that they were maybe withholding something or forgetting to share something. So they bore down on them in a way that wouldn't really be done today, because now we have experts to interview child and adolescent witnesses.
Yeah, and also we are at this moment in a very sensitive state about trauma,
Yeah.
and it was much less sensitive in that situation.
Correct.
They didn't mean to, but they were in a sense injuring these children by
Yes.
being so brusque or aggressive.
Exactly. Because they kept questioning them and saying, they tried a different tactic that they might use on a criminal.
Yeah.
And they said, if you're lying, you could go to jail. You could go to juvenile hall. And think about how Polly's family feels. You could end that right now. And the girls just, their stories never changed. They maintained, we're telling the truth.
Yes.
And the feeling of not being believed by the cops caused a great deal of trauma, possibly as much as or more than the trauma of having their best friend taken right in front of them.
Yeah, and that's changed.
It has.
Now that kind of thing is done differently.
Right.
In every crime show
Right.
of this sort, especially with a child abduction, it is, and if the parents are estranged, then the number one suspect has to be
Right. The estranged parent.
the father in this case.
Right. They polygraphed and cleared Mark very quickly, as they did, other members of the family. But yes, today they have child and adolescent forensic interviewers and soft rooms that feel like living rooms where they take kids and they interview them very gently. And they would never have subjected kids to a polygraph as they did in this case.
And he was elsewhere and had
Right.
a bona fide alibi
Right.
and didn't do it.
Correct.
Well, somebody did do it. What evidence, what leads, what process led to finding Polly and finding Polly's abductor?
Right. So it was 2 months of red herrings and dead ends. They went through 12,000 actionable leads, investigations, and 60,000 tips.
Oh.
And they turned up almost nothing. They had a lead on a suspect that looked a lot like the sketch and had a history of kidnapping or trying to kidnap and rape young girls, and had in fact a yellow bandana, as one of the girls remembered the kidnapper having in the room, which she didn't actually have. So about 2 months into the case, the break came when a woman named Dana Jaffe was hiking on her property. It's a wooded property in the Sonoma Hills, and she stumbled upon some suspicious items. There was a black men's sweatshirt, a little girl's pair of tights, some ligatures that had been used and tied in knots, and a condom and a wrapper. And she thought, this looks like a crime scene. She called the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. They came out, and then they called Petaluma. Petaluma sent someone who had been in Polly's room on the night of the kidnapping, and he said, these ligatures, these bindings look a lot like what we found in the room. And so that caused them to look up a stop that had occurred on the night of the kidnapping. So at Dana Jaffe's house, her babysitter had come home late one night, and on the way out, it had encountered a white Pinto that was stuck on the driveway in a ditch. And there was a creepy guy, and she had an encounter and thought, this guy's up to no good. Drove into town, found a payphone, because there were no cell phones, of course. Payphone ate her quarter. She found another, way to call. And she told Dana, there's a stranger on your property, and I think he might be headed up the hill. You're in danger, you need to get out. So Dana left, came into town, called the cops. The sheriffs came out and basically got the trespasser at the time. He was just a trespasser off the property. And so they made the connection later that trespasser was in fact Polly's abductor.
Careless driving, he drove into a ditch and that undid him, in a sense.
Right.
Aside from that little stupidity of his, that error, he might have
gotten away.
He might have gotten away
Right.
with all of it.
Right.
How did they find Polly?
Well, after Dana Jaffe found the suspicious items on her property, they looked up the trespasser's identity. They saw his criminal record. They tracked him down. He was a repeat offender who had recently been incarcerated and was out on parole. And they found him staying at his sister's house, and there was a SWAT raid. He actually wasn't there at that moment, but he shortly later pulled up. They arrested him for, I think it was violation of parole. He had not checked in with his parole officer. And they incarcerated him and then found an inked print that matched a latent print that was found on Polly's bed frame.
And he finally led them to the body.
That's
yes?
right. They interviewed him, and in the interview, he confessed to killing her, and he led them to her body.
They're in. I think I have. Without, I mean, we don't know exactly how these things morph, but one thing that happened was that there was this revulsion against a convicted criminal running loose, which then leads to the so-called 3 strikes law.
Right. The fact that Richard Allen Davis had been incarcerated and arrested so many times for so many violent crimes. He had had a history of trying to kidnap and rape women, and he had a long list of violent crimes. People used this kidnapping, Polly's kidnapping, to pass the 3 strikes law, which in California, which I think was the second state, meant that on your 3rd felony, you get a life sentence.
Right. And it filled the prisons.
It did.
And we are moving back away from some of those felonies were a very expensive bicycle.
Correct. In the beginning, I think they changed the law so that it had to be 3 violent offenses because a very expensive bicycle could be a felony. So they did kind of change it, but it did lead to mass incarceration and increasing incarceration of racial inequality.
And 3 violent offenses seems to me sensible. 3 expensive bicycles, not, obviously. I mean,
right.
And we've moved back some from the 3 strikes you're out law and order mentality, I think, over time. We've moved back. The other thing that happened culturally, so to speak, is I don't know if this is in your book or stranger danger, a kind of new attitude of parents about the safety of their children.
Right. I really think that this case marked the end of free-range childhood and the beginning of helicopter parenting and fearful parenting. And I think that, before this, I grew up, 3 years before this, I was 12 and I was allowed to walk 5 miles in a California town by myself without a cell phone. And after this, I think my childhood would have been different.
But nationally, it is not just your childhood.
Right.
I mean, we all have children and grandchildren, and of course the now parents track their children with their children's cell phone.
Right.
Is there a place here where where care becomes spying or excessive?
Well, I think there can be too much of a good thing. And I do think that, yes, it changed the nature of childhood in America.
And if we agree, I think we agree that we're moving back from the 3 strikes excess. Are we also, do you think, these last few years now, moving back from the neurotic parenting excess?
I hope so.
If it's neurotic. I mean, some people would say you can't be too careful. But yes, you can be too careful.
Right. I can't speak for everyone. I do think that the pendulum tends to swing in the other direction. And I do think that, I don't know, at least the people that I know are in favor of letting kids roam a little bit freer and letting them make mistakes and learn from them.
Are we suffering from a generalized cultural paranoia about the safety of children? Or is there more kidnapping, do you think, as time passes and the endless evening news tells you that murders are up 2% and carjackings are down 1% and so on? Are children kidnapped more or less, or more often, less often, just as often as ever? Do we have any notion about that?
I believe that the trends are not making any big swings either way. I think if anything, it might be slightly less. I think that because of news coverage, our awareness of when it does happen is greater, and so that stokes the fear.
It may very well be, like a lot of things, we just know now every time we know there's a house fire in America, it's on the evening news.
Right.
You are a writer of meticulous detail, research, and double checking. So books don't come out once a year.
No.
But what do you think you're going to do next?
Next, I am actually 5 years into the research for my next book, which is about the fight to save Idaho salmon from extinction. I didn't know until I moved to Idaho that king salmon, Chinook, in Idaho are really on the brink. We're on the brink of losing a keystone species, and so I'm doing a source to sea reporting trip and talking to stakeholders along the way.
Well, this will get some volunteers. It may not get 4,000, but
A lot of people interested.
but there are, and I'll bet there. The more people know, the more interested they're going to be.
I hope so.
Well, I'll look for it.
Thank you.
And it will be my introduction to the troubles of the Chinook salmon, but I'm in.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Kim.
Thanks
It
so
has
much
been
for
a pleasure.
having me. It's always great to talk to you.